Hello and welcome. Thank you for being here. Thank you for sharing your time with us. My name is Shane Watson. I'm the Public Information Officer for Not My Kid and also a prevention specialist for the organization. We have a special training for school faculty and administration and other education workers today, as you see, on teen behavioral and mental health. How to identify preteens and teens who may be struggling with something like substance use issues or mental health challenges like depression, self-injury, or suicidal thoughts. I'll tell you a little bit more about who I am and why I do what I do here in just a moment. But first, I would like to introduce my co-facilitator, Alexa Morganroth, who will tell you a little bit more about herself.
Thank you, Shane. Hi, everyone. My name is Alexa Morganroth, and I am the Director of Program Development here at Not My Kid. Wow, that's sometimes a mouthful. So I do this for three different reasons. First, I'm a person in long-term recovery, so I love having these conversations and doing what I do. Second, my job here is to create peer support programming. And specifically what we do is create support for individuals experiencing substance use challenges, mental health challenges, and just overcoming life obstacles. But I really do this because when I was 8 years old, I had a very important incident happen to me. My parents got divorced, and my brother and I both went to the same therapist. I loved it. He hated it. And at 8 years old, I couldn't understand why we had such different experiences. And at that age, I wanted to become a counselor and work with children of divorce. Well, you fast forward about 20 years and I got my master's in child psychology, and that turned into working with teens and young adults overcoming different issues in their life. So the dream sort of came true. And with that, I'll pass it back to Shane.
Thank you, Alexa. As I mentioned earlier, my name is Shane Watson, Public Information Officer for Not My Kid. I've been with the organization 9 years. I've done over 600 speaking engagements for Not My Kid throughout the United States. I am passionate about prevention and youth mental and behavioral health. And hopefully that's evident in the conversation that we have here today. For Not My Kid, I educate on 9 or 10 different mental and behavioral health topics. One of them is substance use. And my connection to this topic has three very distinct parts. First is professionally through my work with Not My Kid. 5 of the 9 years that I've been with Not My Kid, I've also been facilitating an early intervention program called Project Rewind. We help middle school and high school students who are dealing with mild to moderate substance use issues. They're beginning to experiment with drugs and alcohol, but they're not so far down the path of use that they require, for example, a residential inpatient rehab stay. My second connection to the topic of substance use is a very personal one. Like Alexa, I am in long-term recovery, 10 plus years sober. And I went from being a kid that grew up in an amazing home with wonderful parents, got good grades, played sports, on paper looked like a healthy kid, to somebody that struggled with substance use issues for close to 2 decades. Ended up addicted to a variety of substances, including alcohol, methamphetamine, cocaine, heroin. Ended up incarcerated twice. And as a result of the decisions that I made, the last night that I drank or used, November 28th, 2011, ended up a convicted felon. Nearly lost my own life and was looking at the possibility of a 3 to 5 year prison sentence. So to say that this subject had a profound effect on my life is not an overstatement. My third and final connection to this topic is the one that drives me the most. I'm the very proud dad of an amazing, strong, intelligent, beautiful, incredible little 9-year-old girl. And I not only want to equip my family with the tools and the knowledge and the resources to prevent or intervene in youth mental and behavioral health challenges, I want to equip you to do the same for your families and for the kids that you work with in a school environment, in after-school environments, in a mentorship capacity, etc. If you're not familiar with our organization, by the way, we were founded 22 years ago by a Scottsdale family, Debbie and Steve Moak, who went through a substance use challenge with their own son. And he looked like the perfect kid. He was a scholar, an athlete, a student leader. They didn't realize that he was struggling with substance use issues until he was in the grips of full-blown addiction. They got him help, got him on the road to recovery. He's doing fantastic today. He's using his experience to help others. But when they resolved their own issue, they felt like their job wasn't done. They said, okay, we love our kids. We're involved in their lives. We spend time with them. We're doing this correctly, and this still happened to us. How many families out there are not prepared to intervene, or better yet, prevent these issues from occurring in the first place? So you look at the top of that left-hand column. We were founded around that flagship topic of substance use, and we since expanded out to include all the topics that you see here on the screen for 2 main reasons. Number one, challenges like depressive thoughts, body image issues, unhealthy relationships, unsafe online behavior. There is not a middle school or high school that you can walk into where those aren't a reality. Number two, the reason that we speak on all these is we've learned they're often interconnected. Very frequently, when a young person is struggling with one of these, they're struggling with another one, or they are at greater risk to struggle with another one. And in educating on these, we want to reach parents, school faculty, and we want to reach the kids themselves, because if we can educate and empower all of those groups to get together, working together on the same page, communicating together, we can create change. And we are no longer just a prevention organization. Within the last few years, Not My Kid has expanded out to include the full continuum of mental and behavioral health care beyond our prevention programs, which is what we were founded on. We have the early intervention program that I referred to earlier. We are licensed as an outpatient treatment facility offering individual, family, and group counseling. And we are now offering peer support through our Inspired program, which Alexa will talk a little bit more about later on toward the end of this presentation. And this is going to set the tone for the conversation that Alexa and I are going to have with you for the remainder of this time. We mentioned Project Rewind, our early intervention program. Well, I'd say about 90% of the kids that end up in the program are referred by schools. They're caught on campus with drugs or paraphernalia. They're under the influence. The remaining 10% are referred by their family, either being proactive or the parents have discovered an issue. When they're referred, we want to know what substance the teen is being referred for. These are the referral rates for some of our most recent groups at Project Rewind. You see that over 50% involves THC, tetrahydrocannabinol, the active ingredient in marijuana that causes the high, but the damage to the developing brain. So that counts wax pens, shatter, dabs, butane hash oil. 32% vaping nicotine, and you see the remainder as well. I will hone in on one thing down at the very bottom. Prescription drugs at 3%. I will tell you that number seems very low to me. Keep in mind, these are the numbers that kids are being referred for that their family or school is aware that they are using. That doesn't mean that they're not using other substances. We're only getting a 3% referral rate for prescription drug misuse. I feel very strongly that the use rate is much higher for these kids. So let's talk about the substance that we are probably getting the most kids, or we are getting the most kids referred for, THC, tetrahydrocannabinol. In marijuana, there are many active ingredients. In cannabis, there's several active ingredients, and the one that we're really going to focus on is called THC, or delta-9 THC, tetrahydrocannabinol. It is the one responsible for the high that people are looking for, but also responsible for the damage to the developing brain. It's important to emphasize that our organization is not in the conversation related to medical marijuana. We don't comment on adult use. We are in the field of prevention for children and adolescents. And the truth is, the effect of regular THC use on the still developing brain is significantly different and more damaging than the effect of THC on the fully developed adult brain. And that's why this conversation is so crucial. Truth is, THC, nicotine, prescription drugs, street drugs, alcohol, they all affect the developing adolescent brain in a different and much more damaging way than they do our fully developed adult brain. Now, if you're seeing this and you're thinking, I smoked back in the 90s, the 80s, the 70s, it really didn't seem like that big of a deal. Keep in mind one very big difference today, and it's what you see here on the screen. Years ago, if somebody was rolling a joint, they were doing bong hits, they might be smoking marijuana with a 3 to 5% THC content. Now, because some strains have been genetically engineered to increase the THC content as high as possible, it is not unusual to see strains averaging, keep in mind, this is averaging 15 to 30% THC. However, we're not meeting nearly as many kids anymore who are smoking marijuana. What we are meeting is we are meeting kids who are vaping THC concentrates, like what you see here on the screen in the top row. If they are using a concentrated form of THC, it is not unreasonable to expect them to be somewhere in the 50 to 80, 50 to 90% THC range. So a very small amount is going to produce a very profound high, a very profound effect, but more of the damage to the developing brain. You see edibles down there at the bottom. You can get THC in gummy bears from dispensaries, etc. So if we're looking for rolling papers, we're going to be a little bit behind the curve. What we're looking for now are things like wax pens that you see here, also called dab pens. Dabs themselves look like a sticky amber resin. Then you can also get THC concentrates in oil cartridges that thread back on the top of a pen type vape system. So when you run out, you keep the actual device and you just get a new cartridge. And finally, the THC concentrate called wax looks like exactly like what it sounds like. It looks like wax. By the way, I've met some educators, some school resource officers who have caught students with wax hidden in Carmex containers. Because if you pack it in really well and you smooth out the surface on our example picture here is very rough. You smooth it out, it can actually look like Carmex. So if a SRO is checking what somebody has and they open the lid, it looks like Carmex. We not only need to be aware of what it looks like, we need to be aware of the signs and symptoms of use. Now, a lot of the signs and symptoms that we have here on the screen are probably obvious to you. The one that most people might not be familiar with is a lack of eye convergence. And I'll draw your attention to that down at the bottom. If you've ever seen an episode of Cops or Live PD where you're seeing a roadside sobriety test, you might have seen an officer have someone plant their feet, stand still, look forward, keep their head still, not move their head. And the officer will take something like a pen and ask them to follow it with their eyes only. They'll do a series of circles around their face. They'll move the pen far out from their face and they'll move it about an inch away from their nose. When somebody does that, generally the eyes will converge or cross on that point about an inch away from the nose. Somebody under the influence of THC will not be able to converge their eyes. Often one will go toward the center and another one will go off out toward the side. Keep in mind that based on genetics, some people are not able to do this at all, even if they're not under the influence of THC. And as you see with the asterisk at the bottom, other substances can cause this issue as well. We wanted to include this for informational purposes. We are not encouraging you to do a roadside sobriety test on your students, but the more information you can have, the better you can be aware of what are these students using? What do I need to help them with? Now, really important thing to add here on our section about vaping and e-cigarettes, and it's going to be similar to what I said at the beginning of our marijuana section. Our organization is not looking to have vapes and e-cigarettes banned. We're not looking to have vape shops shut down. These were created as a harm reduction method, as a smoking cessation method for adults. Numerous adults have used vapes and e-cigarettes to quit tobacco, taper their nicotine levels down over time, and eventually quit entirely. We applaud that. Having said that, we have yet to meet the middle school or high school student who is using these to quit smoking. More often than not, they're using them as their entry point into substance use. Years ago, it would typically go cigarettes, alcohol, marijuana. What we're seeing most commonly now is we're seeing vaping nicotine, vaping THC concentrates, and in many cases, alcohol has gotten bumped to number 3. As you see down there at the bottom, it can make it really hard to detect. A student smoking a cigarette in a school hallway and a student hitting a vape are going to produce two very different amounts of smell. And whereas the smoke from the cigarette will linger for a while, blowing out a quick vape hit can dissipate really, really quickly. Now, some students use larger vape models that look like big box mod vapes. You have the more medium-sized ones. A few years ago, the Suorin Drop and the Suorin Air were pretty popular. And you look at these, and these aren't necessarily something that would catch our eye from across a room with a giant neon sign above them saying, "This is dangerous for this teen." The ones on the top kind of look like an MP3 player. Very sleek design, bright colors. However, this is probably what you've heard the most about in the last handful of years. The most sought after model, the most popular with middle school and high school kids, the Juul. Now, on that far right side where you see that black cap, that is where the pod is put in. A pod is a cartridge that holds the liquid in either 3% or 5% nicotine. To create an equivalence with a pack of cigarettes, 5% nicotine in a single Juul pod is like the amount of nicotine in a pack of cigarettes. And the liquid was available in pretty much any flavor you can think of: mango, creme brulee, cherry, cool mint, vanilla, cucumber. Even as an adult, those flavors sound appealing. How much more so is that appealing when you're a kid? So this was the model, not only for the flavors, but how sleek the design looked. As a matter of fact, Men's Fitness magazine referred to the Juul as the iPhone of e-cigarettes. What in our society is more sought after than the latest, greatest iPhone, especially if you're a middle school or high school student? Well, anyway, school faculty and
Sorry,
parents.
Shane, I'm going to jump in for a sec.
Please do.
I've been sitting here quiet, but I really want to share on
Absolutely.
this topic because, you know, over the past year, facilitating to those teens and families that have been engaging in this behavior in school and been referred to our early intervention program, we hear the same thing over and over, that this device is easy to obtain and sold all over the place. So they're getting these devices at local convenience stores, local gas stations, not just smoke shops. So that's also contributing to the amount we're seeing in the community, that they are sold in a lot of different places.
Ease of access absolutely will increase use. The easier that a young person can get their hands on something, as Alexa said, the more likely they're going to use it. We've seen this with kids taking their first drink of alcohol because they could steal it from mom and dad's liquor cabinet. Because this got so popular and it was so easy to access and the flavors were so appealing, parents, by the way, let me back up to the Juul. Parents, there was a great outcry from parents saying Juul is marketing to kids. So in 2019, the government banned all Juul flavors except for menthol and tobacco. Now, I don't know a lot of middle school and high school students who want menthol or tobacco flavored Juul pods. So a lot of people felt like this has legislated this out of existence. We'll never have to deal with this again. The problem is taken care of. Not so fast. On a footnote on page 9 of the flavored vaping ban, it said that manufacturers can still make any flavor they want if it's not in a refillable cartridge or pod type system. If it is in a disposable device that is thrown away after a single use or after the liquid runs out. That's where we now have the puff bar. Looks a lot like the Juul, doesn't it? Exact same design, 3% or 5% nicotine like the Juul, and available in pretty much all of the same flavors that Juul was available in. So now what we're looking at is we're looking at disposables like you see here on the screen. This has now replaced the Juul. For many kids, it's replaced the Suorin Drop, the Suorin Air, the big box mod vapes. It's cheaper, it's easier to conceal, and when you're done with it, you don't have to hide it from mom and dad. You can just throw it away. Now, we may be at this point, and you may be wondering, okay, but why is this such a big deal for kids to use this? Keep in mind that anyone of any age could become addicted to nicotine. Any of us in this conversation right here, you viewing it, Alexa, myself, of any age could become addicted to nicotine. Nicotine is very addictive. It's very difficult to quit. The withdrawal symptoms are not pleasant. But what we don't see in adult users that we do see in middle school and high school students is problems with memory, attention, and learning. You may have kids who are having a hard enough time sitting still in your classes as it is because they're middle schoolers, they're high schoolers, they're fidgety. If they are putting a stimulant in the still developing brain, it may mean that they are going to retain less of the information they're hearing in your class. They're going to pay attention less. And that is going to impact their academics, which can reflect upon you as an educator. So beyond the human cost here, there's an educational cost. What about just the e-liquid? 80% of kids said that they started because of the flavor. So some kids do vape just e-liquid without nicotine. The research that has been coming out in the last few years is showing that it can cause permanent lung damage. The Harvard vaping study, there's been a number of other ones as well. But to me, the most interesting is what you see down here under vaping in general, lack of long-term research. We have decades of research on prescription drugs, on street drugs, on alcohol. We can project out if somebody is using those things and doesn't have an immediate impact. Well, 5 years down the road, this might happen to you. 10 years down the road, you're probably going to deal with this. With vaping, it's such a new thing. The modern day e-cigarette was just marketed in 2003. We don't have the luxury of a significant body of long-term research to look at and project out. So if a young person is not paying an immediate price, we have no guarantee that they're not going to down the road. Alexa, anything you'd like to add on this?
No, I think you covered it. I'm going to let you finish it up.
Awesome. Sounds good. So what do we look for? Well, Some of these warning signs are obvious: smelling fruit, mint, etc. You're smelling the flavors from the e-liquid. Don't bank on being able to smell it, though. It dissipates very quickly. Increased thirst and nosebleeds. Where this comes from is the e-liquid that is typically used in vapes and e-cigarettes is propylene glycol. Propylene glycol is a food additive that is used in prepackaged shrink-wrapped foods that's going to sit on store shelves for a prolonged period of time. And what it does is it draws moisture out of it to keep it from spoiling. Well, it can draw moisture out of the mucous membranes and the mouth, therefore increasing nosebleeds and increasing thirst as well. And by the way, the caffeine sensitivity. If you have a student that every day is sitting in your class with a Rockstar, a Monster, a Red Bull, and suddenly they're completely foregoing the caffeine and you're seeing these other signs and symptoms, they may be using nicotine. The reason why on this is some people, based on their genetics, when they begin using nicotine, they can develop a sensitivity to caffeine. So the signs and symptoms here, the majority of the other ones are pretty much self-explanatory, finding vapes or vape parts as well. This next section is one where we have absolutely zero room for error. And you see this statistic right here. Our students are misusing prescription drugs. In the United States, after nicotine, THC, and alcohol, typically the three substances that kids are going to start with, 12th graders are then moving most commonly to prescription drug misuse. When you are moving from nicotine to prescription drug misuse, you are taking an enormous leap into greater danger. And one of the main concerns with prescription drugs is what Alexa mentioned earlier with the Juuls, with the vapes: ease of access. Mom and dad often have these painkillers in their medicine cabinets, or grandma and grandpa, or if a teen goes to a friend's house, maybe they have painkillers in the medicine cabinet and they're not locked up. So we need to lock up our prescriptions and safely dispose of our unused medications at an approved drop-off location. The DEA has take-back events a couple times a year. Police stations often have drop boxes in their lobbies as well. The number two concern is low perception of risk. When we talk to middle school and high school students, a lot of times the perception is, well, these aren't as dangerous as meth and heroin. This isn't made in a meth lab. A drug dealer isn't selling these. You get these from a doctor. I watch my grandma take these pain pills. How dangerous could this be? And when misused, when taken by someone for whom they're not prescribed in too large of a quantity or too frequently, they are as deadly as any street drug. And we see this in this stat right here from the National Institute on Drug Abuse. Since 2003 in the United States, prescription painkiller overdoses have killed more people than heroin and cocaine combined. We can't be naive about the dangers of these drugs. We need to educate our kids, lock up our prescriptions, dispose of them safely, and help our kids find better coping skills to deal with the stress and the anxiety that they do have. Before we look at Arizona stats on this, Alexa, anything that you want to add?
No, I'll get into it when we start talking about signs and symptoms.
And then we're coming up on that here shortly.
Yeah.
Sounds good. Now, in our state of Arizona, more than a third of students who are misusing prescription drugs are combining them with other prescription drugs or alcohol. This is a recipe for a fatality. When you're combining two central nervous system depressant drugs, like opioid painkillers and Xanax, for example, or you're combining a depressant drug and alcohol, which is a central nervous system depressant, the line between that buzz that teen is looking for and a dose powerful enough to shut down breathing to cause a fatality, that line is far more fine than they realize. And where are they coming from? Nearly 80% in Arizona are getting them from friends, family, or right out of the home. And we're even seeing them getting them from friends on campus, which we'll talk about here in just a moment. And prescription drug misuse is the bridge to fentanyl. We created this slide because you've probably heard so much in the last half dozen years or so in the news about fentanyl. But if you don't work in behavioral health or substance use treatment or law enforcement or medicine, you might not be familiar with what fentanyl actually is. It was created for people who are dealing with significant major pain, cancer patients, people in palliative end of life care, post-surgery. And fentanyl was made to be worn in a time-release transdermal patch that releases small amounts of it over time through the skin into the bloodstream in a controlled manner. The majority of people that we're meeting who are overdosing or dying from fentanyl are not using these transdermal patches. The question we get asked more than anything else about fentanyl, which we answer down in the teal text here at the bottom of the screen, we get asked so much, why are people doing this? If this is so deadly, why are people using fentanyl? The majority of people that are overdosing and dying do not realize they are using fentanyl. They think they are buying OxyContin, Vicodin, Percocet, Xanax, Ativan, Klonopin, because cartels can buy it in bulk. Most often, fentanyl comes in bulk from China. Some of it comes from Europe. And cartels can purchase it in big 55-gallon drums, use a pill press. And with a pill press, you can make it the right shape, the right color, imprint. You can do a branded logo. You can make it look like any pill you want it to look like. And if that person who's taking the pill didn't get it directly from a pharmacy, they have no guarantee that it is what they think they're taking. On the left, you see a real 2 milligram Xanax. The active ingredient is called alprazolam. It's an anti-anxiety medication that is actually very popular with middle school and high school students for recreational use, very popular. But on the right, you have a very convincing fake, no alprazolam in it at all, that is made solely from fentanyl. Even as someone who knows what to look for, to me, that is a convincing fake. How much more so is that going to be convincing to a middle school or high school student? These blue 30 milligram oxys, which hit Tucson first and work their way up through the state, very convincing. And here is why it's so deadly. On the right, you see the lethal dose of fentanyl for an average sized adult male, 2 to 3 milligrams. Compare that with a lethal dose of 30 milligrams of heroin. That's 10 times more deadly than heroin. How many things in life can we say are more deadly than heroin? Fentanyl is one of them. And this is not happening in somebody else's state and somebody else's neighborhood. Arizona is getting hit particularly hard due to our border proximity. We are a primary hub for the Sinaloa cartel. Started down in Tucson, it worked its way up. And these are ending up on campus. 3 students at San Luis High School in San Luis, Arizona got busted with thousands of pills on campus, and a Notre Dame prep student overdosed on a fake Percocet, fake oxycodone pill that he purchased from a sophomore peer. This is happening in our schools, in our neighborhoods, in our state. This is not a problem somewhere else. Now, Alexa is going to bring you up to speed on, well, what do we look for?
Yeah, thanks, Shane. Next, I want to talk about signs and symptoms of drug use. Specifically, we'll start with signs and symptoms of fentanyl use, and then how to spot a fentanyl overdose and what to do. So the telltale sign of fentanyl use, opioid use that you can visually see in a classroom if you're observing somebody is somebody nodding. So if you see someone quietly dropping their head and closing their eyes and the inability to pay attention, having slurred speech, that's a telltale sign of somebody who's experiencing fentanyl use and or opioid use. Another symptom is the eyes. So the eyes don't lie is something we like to say. And if you see constricted pinpoint pupils, that's another sign of an opioid use or fentanyl use. The other signs and symptoms are listed. One of them that you might not be able to see as an educator is constipation. That is something that over and over we hear again from teens, young adults, and others who've abused fentanyl and opioids, that's something they struggle with. So if you hear someone complaining of that, this might be something that's worth a conversation with a school administrator or a parent. Shane, I'm going to have you thank you. So now let's talk about signs and symptoms of a fentanyl overdose. How does it get from, hey, this person might be using fentanyl to, hey, I think they're having an overdose? And this is something that has caused a lot of communication lately, and we're getting a lot of questions about this from educators and school faculty. And one big sign and symptom is somebody not responding to verbal commands, meaning we're talking to them, we're asking questions, we're calling their name, and they're having an inability to respond. Their breathing may still be slow, so we may not immediately know that it's an overdose, but slow to no breathing is a telltale sign. If you hear a deep, like gurgling sound coming from somebody while you're observing little or no breathing, that's another sign. And something you can really visually see is loss of color in their face or their lips or fingertips turning blue. I'm going to pass it back to Shane to talk about what to do if you suspect somebody is experiencing a fentanyl or opioid overdose, because there is a real direct action we can do to alleviate that.
And with this, obviously talk with your administration and find out what your policy and your procedure is at your school. But what's recommended if you realize someone has overdosed on fentanyl or any other opioid? Obviously, number one, call 911, activate EMS immediately. Then perform a sternum rub. If they are not responding to verbal commands or questions, you take your knuckles and rub them right here on the sternum. That's very uncomfortable. If someone is able to respond, they typically will respond to a sternum rub. They will sit up, they will open their eyes, they'll tell you to stop. If they're not responding to that, that is something significant is going on. Then what you do is you administer Narcan. That's the brand name for naloxone. Where can you get naloxone? Where can you get trained on it? If you see down there at the bottom of the screen, Suorin Prevention Works, spwaz.org will dispense and will train you. Not My Kid is going to become a provider of naloxone. We will make it available as well. You cannot make a mistake with naloxone. It cannot happen. You cannot harm someone with naloxone. Now, most often the way that it's administered is what you see here on the screen. It is a nasal spray, one spray into each nostril. The reason that you cannot harm someone with it is because it only is designed to do one thing. Now, I'm going to use really ridiculously simple science here because it's about as well as I can explain it. But what causes an opioid or fentanyl overdose is when opioid receptors in the brain get overcrowded. When they get overcrowded, that's when breathing stops, and that is when fatalities occur. All that naloxone does is clear off those opioid receptors so breathing can start again. You cannot harm someone with this. If you give naloxone to someone who is not having an opioid overdose, it will not hurt them. It will do nothing. After you've administered one spray in each nostril, begin rescue breathing. I highly recommend that every adult get naloxone and get trained on it. It is perfectly legal in the state of Arizona. You do not need a prescription. You can buy it over the counter at pharmacies. This was signed into law by Governor Ducey a while back. And you can get it for free, again, from Suorin Prevention Works. And in the not too distant future, Not My Kid is looking to become a naloxone provider as well. This can give someone a second chance at life. I have seen lives changed by naloxone where that person then has another chance to go and stop using, to get help, and to live a fruitful, fulfilling life. So Alexa is now going to talk about some more signs and symptoms of substance use. And actually, did you want me to do opioid use, Alexa, since I'm coming out of that
I'll
list?
take it, Shane.
Go for it. That sounds good.
Just to continue, signs and symptoms of opioid use are essentially exactly the same as signs and symptoms of fentanyl use. You're going to see the fatigue, the little or no reaction for pupils to light. And like I said, the eyes don't lie. So when you see those constricted pinpoint pupils, you know, there's something that deserves a conversation. And if it's not drugs, there's something going on in that person's life that deserves that conversation. So Shane, I'm going to have you perfect. So now let's talk about signs and symptoms of depressant use. And one important thing to note is that a depressant doesn't mean it makes a person mentally depressed. So it's called a depressant because of the way it affects your central nervous system and how it slows your body down and delays the messages from your body to your brain. And that's why we call it a depressant. Things that are depressants: alcohol, benzodiazepines, if we see a Xanax, if we see vodka, beer, wine. So those things are depressants. And different from opioids, you don't see those pinpoint pupils as much, but you do see similar difficulty concentrating. Your pupils have a slower reaction to light, and it also causes slurred speech. So the telltale sign for opioids, right? We're going to see that falling asleep nod and inability to really concentrate, where depressant use will more see the slurred speech. We won't see that total nodding fall asleep, but we'll more see that other symptom. And Shane, let's talk about stimulant use next, because unlike the last two, we see a lot more mood swings with stimulant use. We see a lot of hyperactivity, a lot of hyper focus. With stimulant use, we also see a decreased appetite. Maybe somebody, all of a sudden, they're not eating as much. And we've had a lot of questions where, how do I tell the difference between stimulant use and normal adolescent behavior, right? My teenager is going through mood swings. My teenager stopped eating. You know, that's a good question. Some of the signs and symptoms can look the same as normal adolescent behavior. But when they're happening over a prolonged period of time and you just can't figure out why, like I said before, there's something that deserves a conversation. And if it's not drugs or alcohol and it is normal adolescent behavior, then we got to figure out what's going to help that person overcome these issues and challenges and help them cope better. So again, if you see someone hyper-focused or having significant mood swings, have that conversation as an educator. Shane, I'll pass it back to you because I can just keep going and going and
Awesome.
going.
And I'll add, as far as stimulants go, when we're talking about stimulants, we're talking about nicotine as a stimulant, cocaine, methamphetamine, or if a kid is taking Adderall or Ritalin, not that they're prescribed. If a child is prescribed Adderall or Ritalin for ADD or ADHD, that'll bounce them out. But if they're purchasing or stealing somebody else's prescription, they don't have an ADD, ADHD diagnosis, they can get a euphoric stimulant kind of rush from Adderall or Ritalin. So when we're talking about stimulants, those are the kind of things that we're talking about. And the reason we share these signs and symptoms with you is it's important to know not only is a student or a child that we're working with using or drinking, we need to understand what it is that they're using in order to know what they need help for. Now, if you saw a Coke can on a desk, if you saw a water bottle in a backpack, if you saw a highlighter in a backpack, would those catch your eye? Probably not. But those are all things that can be used to conceal drugs, and they can be hidden paraphernalia. Pretty much any smoke shop that you go to, head shops, you can buy a variety of devices designed to hide drugs or to be used as paraphernalia as well. You can buy a highlighter, a working highlighter marker that actually has a pipe in it. You can buy a water bottle that has a concealment chamber in it. It can be hard to know to intervene in a problem if we can't locate the source of a problem. However, while we do meet some kids that are using these professionally made devices, which by the way, you can buy online as well, we meet an equal or actually greater amount who are improvising their own paraphernalia. If you are finding burnt aluminum foil, that can be used to smoke a variety of things. It can be used to smoke heroin. It can be used to smoke marijuana. In the center, you see if you are finding cut straws. Cut straws can be used to snort a variety of powders. If you're finding pens with the inside of the pen taken out and just the tube left with each end open, that can be used for snorting powders as well. The little baggie is obvious, especially if you find residue in it. Over there on the right with the blue cap, you see a pill crusher. You can smoke marijuana out of a Coke can, out of a soda can. That's been around for ages. And the hand that you're seeing in the bottom center is holding Whippets, nitrous oxide cartridges, which provide a really quick, rapid high. Those can typically be purchased at head shops as well. It's equally as important that we talk about other mental health challenges. We've talked about behavioral health challenges in terms of substance use, but you are just as likely to encounter students who are dealing with depression, stress and anxiety, self-injury, or considering suicide. And it is so crucial that we know what it is to look for and how to respond. And I'm going to talk about what to look for, and Alexa's going to talk about how to respond here in a couple minutes. Now, these are the signs of depression in youth. You know your students probably better than just about anyone, with the exception of their parents. And for some of you, you probably know some of your students better than their own parents know them. You get to know them at the beginning of the semester. You get to learn what's normal for them. Now, any of us can have an off day or a couple off days or some changes in mood or changes in behavior, as Alexa alluded to earlier. That just may be somebody going through the teen years. But when you are checking off multiple changes in behavior in combination over a prolonged period of time, something is going on. And as Alexa has said several times, we need to begin a conversation. Sit down with that student and indicate what we've seen and explain, I'm here to help you. As much as I'm here to teach you whatever topic I teach, I'm here to help you grow and thrive as a human being. And begin that conversation and find out what is going on. Is it substance use? Is it depression? Are they being bullied? Are they having relationship issues? Is something going on at home? Doing that not only is going to help that student, we may end up being the person that changes or saves that individual's life. Suicidal ideation. There are some things that we're going to look for. Number one is direct verbal cues. Students who are using phrases like, I want to kill myself, I want to die, I want to commit suicide. Now in behavioral health, we no longer say commit because there's a stigma attached to that word. We say die by suicide. But if a kid says it, a teen says it, they're probably going to say commit. I'm going to go commit suicide. Those are direct verbal cues. Those are not as common as indirect verbal cues. No direct reference to death or suicide, but phrases like, I wish I was never born. I wish I could go to sleep and never wake up. I can't handle life anymore. I'm so over all of this. You're all going to regret this later. No direct reference to death or suicide, but you can see where it may be pointing in that direction. Behavioral cues. Somebody who no longer finishes their homework or does their chores around the house, because if you think you're about to end your life, your history homework and taking out the garbage is really not that important anymore. Someone who's giving away their skateboard, their iPhone, their clothes, because again, if you're about to end your life, your possessions don't really matter anymore. Someone who starts writing a lot of texts or messages or letters that sound like goodbye letters. Someone who's not normally very affectionate, giving lots of hugs and kisses as if they're saying their goodbyes. And then someone who starts making amends. Now, amends in and of itself is not a bad thing. It's a great thing. But if somebody is doing that in combination with the other things that you see here on the screen, that may be someone who thinks they're about to end their life and they're trying to right all the wrongs that they've done because they don't want that on their conscience when they go. And then situational cues can increase the likelihood that a child will consider, attempt, or complete suicide. It's a kid that is being bullied, a child that's being abused or neglected at home, a child who has no social support, a kid who's constantly being uprooted and moved into new schools and can't put down roots and get friends. A kid whose parents are having a high conflict divorce, whose parents are constantly fighting or abusive toward one another. A child that is struggling with substance use issues is at greater risk. So if you're going through this list and you're thinking of a student and you're saying, check, 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 they are at greater risk. They are at significant risk. And it's crucial to begin a conversation and to bring in some additional support as well. And then signs and symptoms of self-injury. A lot of these are going to be obvious if you are able to see them. You're seeing someone with a number of scars or fresh cuts on their arms or elsewhere. That can be indicative of self-injury. Now, as you see that second bullet point, that person may dismiss it as, oh, I keep falling down. I'm having accidents. Accidents don't look like very precise cuts in the specific area over and over. But you may not be able to see these because sometimes people go to great lengths to hide their self-injury, wearing a number of bracelets or watches, wearing unseasonably hot clothing, long sleeves and a jacket, even in summer, injuring on parts of their body, the inner thighs or places like that, where the general public or maybe even family won't see. You see here statements of worthlessness or helplessness or hopelessness, disconnecting, isolating. And then one more I want to draw your attention to, you see a history of trauma. Childhood trauma, trauma in general, adverse childhood experiences are a significant risk factor that increase the likelihood that a young person is going to self-injure. However, it is not a prerequisite. So we can't look at a kid and say, well, they've never gone through that, so they could never do this. It is not required. It is a risk factor, but it is not a prerequisite. I'm going to pass it back over to Alexa. Now, we've talked about a lot of things that we need to have on our radar, a lot of things that we need to help with, but how do we help? Alexa's going to explain that for you now.
Yeah, thanks, Shane. And this is, in my opinion, the most important point of what we've said tonight is what to do. If I notice these signs and symptoms in somebody, what do I do? What can I do? Better yet. And one thing you can do is have a conversation. Start a conversation, a non-judgmental conversation, and let the person know what you've seen, what your concerns are. If they're not responding to you in a great way, if they're not having that conversation back, that's okay. Just let them know you're there and you care. Next, you can inform your administrator or school counselor. I'm not very familiar with the exact policies of the school, but I'm sure there's a hierarchy that needs to be followed. That's another step someone can take. Inform the student's parents, let them know what you've seen. It takes a village, right? In the education field, we know this. So it takes a village to help somebody, to be an influence on someone's life. And let's do that by informing their parent too. And last but not least is connecting that person to professional help. And all that means is, hey, let's find them some resources in the community, right? So here at Not My Kid, we have responded to what we see going on in the community. And over the past 20 years, starting with prevention services and education services, we've now expanded to behavioral health treatment and support. And like Shane introduced in the beginning, we are a licensed outpatient center, meaning we provide counseling services. So that's one way we can possibly help somebody. And you can find out more about these resources by going to our website and clicking on the behavioral health link. That's notmykid.org. So that's one way we can help. But another more innovative way, in addition to counseling, we also have peer support services. And this was a direct response to what we've seen happening in the community. And peer support, unlike counseling, meets the individual where they're at, meaning it fills in that gap time between school, home, and all the other services. It's a combination between virtual and in-person support, meaning a peer support, a role model, somebody who's been through struggles in their own life and have positively overcome those struggles, now gets the chance to help and support teens and young adults who are experiencing those struggles on their own. And it doesn't just have to be substance use. It doesn't just have to be mental health. It can just be life obstacles in general. Growing up is hard. Nobody gives teens and young adults a handbook on how to live life. So we need support sometimes. We need support with life skills. We need support with having positive communication. We need support with having healthy communication with families. So that's kind of the stuff we do. We fill in the gap services. If needed, we'll call in a counselor. In addition to that, we have a family navigator present. So if anybody has any questions or needs additional resources, please go on our website or reach out directly to one of our programs, and we'll be happy to provide you whatever answers we can give you. What's interesting to note too is Shane talked a lot about paraphernalia and what we're seeing, and frequently we'll get educators and parents giving us a call or stopping by with things they found in their homes that they don't know what they are. So we also provide a good resource for that. The other day I had a parent come in with wires, and they were, it was a phone charger that was chopped off and the electrical wires were sticking out, and they were baffled. They didn't know why they saw something like that. Well, what we're seeing as a trend is that it charges a vape. And if somebody doesn't have the actual vape charger, they can hot wire it to charge. So it's those little tips and tricks we see in the community from following the social trends that we have knowledge and resources of. And Shane, I'm going to pass it back to you.
Knowing those trends is an important reason to listen to our podcast. Win This Year is our podcast. We're about 33, 34 episodes in. I am the host. And you can find it by directly going to winthisyear.buzzsprout.com. Or if you listen to podcasts on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, we are on most major podcast platforms. Just search for Win This Year. We've had parenting experts. We have spoken to educators. We have spoken to parents who have gone through a crisis or a tragedy with their child who want to share their experience so that we can learn from them as parents, as grandparents, as guardians, as educators. So what this will allow you to do is get ongoing information related to all of our topics. You can listen to it on an Apple Watch while you're getting ready in the morning. You can listen to it in your smart enabled vehicle while you're driving to and from work. But this is another one of those resources where we are going to continue to bring you as much education and information on demand when it's convenient for you as possible. Another resource before we wind up here in just a moment, we have a private Facebook group for parents, grandparents, guardians, educators, those who work with youth. It is called Not My Kid Families. Just search Not My Kid Families on Facebook. It is a private group where, like the podcast, we want to bring you information and resources and tips, but equally as important, it is a supportive community where if you need help, you can post a message in the forum there, in the group, and say, we're going through this right now in my family or at my school. Does anybody have any tips? We'll respond from Not My Kid, but then you'll get responses from other parents, grandparents, guardians, educators who can say, Yeah, we went through that same thing last year. Here's what helped us. And you realize instantly you're not alone, you're in good company, and you're being given tangible resources and tips that you can apply to the challenge that you are presently going through. I know this is quite a bit of information to take in. We wanted to try to keep the pace brisk in order to hold your attention and also to make sure that we respected your time. A couple more resources here. Our website, notmykid.org/SA, has our substance use resources on it. Notmykid.org/DEP has our mental health resources as well. But as Alexa said, if you go to our main page, notmykid.org, you can click on behavioral health and get information about our behavioral health programs. You can click on information about our inspired peer support program. And as always, you can email us at info@notmykid.org. That's info@notmykid.org. You can find us on Facebook under Not My Kid, and you can call us at area code 602-652-0163. Alexa, any closing comments before I make mine?
No, my only closing comment is thank you, Shane. It's been a pleasure once again facilitating with you. And anyone is welcome to reach out to me directly. You can just call up Not My Kid and ask for me if you have any follow-up questions. We're here to help the community. So with that, thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much to you, Alexa. Thank you to all of you for sharing your time with us. If we can be of any support moving forward, please reach out to us and let us know. And thank you again to the Valley of the Sun United Way for the Mighty Change Initiative, allowing Not My Kid to be a part of that, and therefore making it possible for us to bring you this information right now. My name is Shane Watson, Public Information Officer and Prevention Specialist for Not My Kid. Thank you for sharing your time with us. Thank you for choosing to be part of the positive solution.